Our reading today is from Psalms 145, verses 1 through 5 and 17 through 21, the Laughing Bird rendition. We will declare you to be the greatest, God our King, and put your name up in lights forever. Every day without fear we will sing your praises, and we will honor your name now and forever. You are wonderful, Lord. You deserve the highest praise, and your greatness is more than we can comprehend. Each generation tells the next what you have done and speaks with awe about your accomplishments. We will fill our minds with your splendor and glory and with the stories of your amazing exploits. Justice marks everything you do, Lord, and generous love colors your every deed. When honest hearts cry out to you, Lord, you are right there alongside them. You satisfy the desires of those who respect you, and you hear the cries and rescue them from death. You watch out for those who love you, Lord, and wipe out corruption when it threatens. Your praises will be always on our lips, Lord, and with all who live, we will single out your name for the highest honor forever and ever. Our next reading is from Job 19, 25, verse 25 through 26. For I know that my vindicator lives, and in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God.
Guess what came up in the lectionary today? My favorite book in the Old Testament, Job. Now, Job only appears 4 times in the 3-year cycle of the lectionary, which is disappointing, but it's understandable. The goal of the lectionary is to guide us through the whole Bible in 9 years. Not verse by verse, mind you, but by key themes and key stories. Today's reading only gives us 2 verses out of the book of Job, and that makes sense too, because it's not easy to read or understand. It's kind of a tough book. But it's my favorite because it offers an alternative to traditional Jewish wisdom literature like Proverbs. Now, Proverbs is full of very straightforward, black and white wisdom. If you do good, good things will happen to you. And if you do bad, bad things will happen to you. And for the most part, that's true. Except when it isn't, right? Proverbs was written for teenage boys. And I'm not kidding, you don't believe me? Here's from the first chapter, verse 8. The writer declares, "Hear, my child, your father's instruction, and do not reject your mother's teaching." So in other words, the foundation of wisdom is do what your mother and father tell you, young man. Okay? Then in the last chapter, chapter 31, there is an entire section dedicated to the women you should avoid and the women you should marry. Okay? So, yes, the book of Proverbs is for teenage boys who are learning the ins and outs of the Jewish tradition. But what is there for us adults? That's the question I want to ask right now. What is there for our adults? What is there for someone who discovers that in real life the wicked get away with doing bad things and the righteous fall into calamity? Not all the time, mind you, but sometimes, and for no apparent reason. So if you attended Gail's Bible study, you know the answer to that question of what is there for adults is Ecclesiastes and Job. Those are 2 books in the Old Testament that are kind of unconventional wisdom literature. This is real wisdom for real people in the real world. For real adults. Our Old Testament professor in seminary said, these books should not be read by anyone under 30. Why? Okay, listen to this. Ecclesiastes basically says, this is the book of Ecclesiastes. You can sum it up in this. Life's a mess and then you die. So you might as well have, see, I cleaned that up a little bit. So you might as well have fun along the way. Job is even more blunt. The message here is sometimes stuff happens and you'll never know why. You don't tell that to a 13-year-old kid. You don't say nothing really matters, so eat, drink, and be merry. You know, you don't say it doesn't matter if you do good or not. Stuff happens anyway, either way, because you're asking for trouble, right? Job, according to the book of Job here, was a very faithful man. Chapter 1 starts out with these words. There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. And after this terrible tragedy happens that takes away his health, his material wealth, and his children, Job tore his clothes, shaved his head, dropped to his knees, and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And when you think about that, that is a powerful statement of faith right there. That's where we get the notion of the patience of Job. Here's a guy who lost everything, but he still says, blessed be the name of the Lord. And then things go south when his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, arrive to comfort him. Now, at first, they did something that Mary would applaud. The author writes, they sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was great. Bravo. Bravo, guys. That's the way you're supposed to play that. Way to hold space with this man who was weighed down by grief. And then Job finally spoke after sitting there for 7 days. And the first thing he said was, why? Why? That's when Job's friend Eliphaz chimed in. Did he affirm Job's question by saying, I hear your grief. Your why shows me how difficult this must be for you? No. He says, let me tell you why. But the only thing that Eliphaz has in his tool belt is what he learned as a 13-year-old boy in Proverbs. Well, Job, this is happening because you did something wrong. Everyone knows that when you do bad things will happen to you. And Zophar and Bildad says, yeah, what he said. Meanwhile, Job is trying to convince them that he has done nothing wrong. He played by the rules. He did everything that the traditional Jewish wisdom and Proverbs said he should do. He even found the perfect Proverbs 31 wife. And now she's saying, this is all your fault, buddy. Just confess your sin and let's get this over with. But he didn't sin. He didn't. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, but in the book of Romans, Paul said that all have fallen short of God's glory. Okay, Paul, it'll be 1,000 years before Paul is even born. So let's stick to Job here. And then this other friend, Elihu, comes along, a fourth friend. He comes around in the middle of the book, comes into the picture and says, listen, I understand how you must be feeling, which is kind of a no-no because does he really know exactly how Job is feeling? But at least he's making an effort to empathize with his friend. Finally, a friend who gets it. A friend who's more mature than these other three guys. And then Elihu says, But you realize this has to be because of something you did. It is your fault. Job just can't win, can he? So Job circumvents his friends. He goes right to the source. He demands that God give him answers. Oh, that I might have my request, and that God would grant me my desire. And he gets nothing but silence. Nothing. And meanwhile, his friends are still badgering him about how obvious it is that he did something wrong. Why? Because good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. That's all they've got. That's all they know, because all they have is the book of Proverbs. Finally, after many chapters of Job crying out to God and using weird metaphors like, you poured me out like milk and curdled me like cheese, his words, God finally breaks the silence. And God says, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Words without knowledge. So is that what God is saying about traditional Jewish wisdom? No, not really. God is referring to the words of Job's friends, because they're the ones who are speaking words without knowledge. And God says, okay, tell you what now. It's your turn to answer my questions. And then God asks Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Explain to me everything you know about snow. Better yet, tell me about thunder. How does that work? What about animals? Let's talk about animals. Mountain goats, deer. Tell me about wild ostrich. Or better yet, a whale. What's up with that? Tell me why they exist. And then finally, God says, Job, sometimes stuff just happens. Now, mind you, I am oversimplifying things here. I'm trying to explain a tediously written 42-chapter book in 15 minutes or less. So this is what's going on. The point is, there is a lot of things in this world that we don't understand. And you know what? That's okay. I know it may seem like I sound like a broken record when I say this, but faith does not require certainty. It doesn't require that we know everything there is to know. Even in the middle of Job's arguments with his friends, he managed to say, I know my vindicator or my redeemer lives. That is authentic faith right there. Even in tough times, it's enough to carry disciples through whatever circumstances come our way. So Martin Thielen, he's a United Methodist pastor who has he's written many books and articles about faith and doubt. And he is the host of A Doubter's Parish, which is a website dedicated to help thinking people navigate faith in the 21st century. His ministry is to shepherd people who are wrestling with traditional beliefs and institutional religion into a better place, into a place that they can grasp. And so his two best-selling books, I love the titles of these. One is, What's the Least I Can Believe and Still Be a Christian? And the other, The Answer to Bad Religion is Not No Religion. So in a commentary that he wrote about Job, he told the story of Eli Wiesel, which if you went to Bible study the other night, we talked about Eli Wiesel the other night. He is a survivor of the Holocaust. Wiesel was just 14 years old when he and his family were taken from their home to a Nazi concentration camp. And his story of the Holocaust is just awful. It is a nightmare beyond belief. And so quite a while ago, he was interviewed on public television, and he was recalling a vivid experience that he had at the concentration camp. there is a group of men in his barracks who decided to have a trial unlike anything he had ever seen or heard before. These men decided to put God on trial for the horrors of the Holocaust. They had been men of faith, but their faith profoundly disappointed them. And so they asked Weissel to witness these proceedings, to hear how much they tried God for abandoning the Jewish people. And the charges were brought, and the prosecutor listed them one by one. God's people had been torn from their homes. God's people had been deported from their families, beaten, abused, murdered, gassed. And then they attempted to build a defense. But in the end, they found God guilty of abandoning God's people and maybe not even existing. So when the trial was over, this dark silence fell over the room. And then a few moments later, the men realized, oh, it's time for evening prayers. So they shut down this trial about whether God even existed so that they could have their prayer time. And so at this point in the story, Weissel recounted a remarkable fact, and that is these men who had just put God on trial and found God guilty of abandoning them, these men still prayed their evening prayers. And folks, that's what faith looks like. Those men had every reason to give up on God, every reason to walk away, and yet, when the time for prayer came, they prayed. They prayed because somewhere deep inside them, they still believed that even in the darkest night, God had not abandoned them. That's what Job did too. He didn't understand. He didn't get the answers he wanted, but he kept the conversation with God going. He held on to hope when hope made absolutely no sense. Friends, that is what disciples do. When life gets hard, we keep showing up. When God seems silent, we keep praying. When life seems unfair, we keep trusting. Why? Because we know that our Redeemer, our Vindicator, lives, which means the story isn't over yet.